Hi everybody, thank you for joining us today for our Dynamic Demos webinar. Before we begin, I have just a few PittCon announcements to go through. First, booth space agreements are available online now. Visit the Exhibitor section on our website to complete yours today. Booth assignments begin on August 7th, so be sure to complete the form before that date to be sure that you're in that first round of assignments on the floor for the best locations. Second, the discounted booth price lasts until September 8th, so make sure you reserve your space before that date to save $300 on every 10x10 booth. Also, there are 5 downloads in your handout section on the GoToWebinar toolbar, so make sure you download all of those materials before we end the webinar today. There's the PDF of the slides and also some more information about Market Tech on there from our presenter. And lastly, we will do a Q&A after the presentation, so make sure you type any questions as you come up with them into the questions box on the GoToWebinar portal, and we'll get to all of them at the end. And now I am excited to introduce our presenter, Holly Sherrill. She is the CEO and President of Market Tech 360. She is a veteran trade show expert bringing over 25 years experience in experiential marketing to trade shows and events. Her specialties include exhibit staff training, strategic planning and consultation, quantifiable objective setting, and ROI tools and execution. Holly is a speaker at national events such as Exhibitor Live, HCEA, and Fast Track. She is a member of the National Association of Women Business Owners, the Alabama Women Business Owners, and the Women's Network. So now I will turn the presentation over to Holly.
Thank you, Kim, and I'm thrilled that you all took the time to join us today. Something near and dear to my heart is creating memorable experiences in our exhibits. And there's actually many ways that we do that. What we're going to focus on today, which is a very important part, is dynamic demos, why we need to do them, how we can make them most successful, and what can they really do for us in driving better results in our exhibits. Here we go. Okay, first of all, what's really the difference between a presentation and demo? Because oftentimes I think people get confused between the two. So to simplify it, really, a presentation is really just an exchange of information that you can have in many different formats in an exhibit booth or another sales setting. But a demonstration takes it one step further because it's more of a persuasive selling opportunity between you and your visitor that's at your exhibit or out in the field where you might be selling. The difference between a demo and a presentation is that the demonstration helps to really prove the value of what you're trying to sell, give a better credibility to the visitor because it's live and 3D, if you will, in front of them. So why conduct demonstrations? Why do we have to do those versus a presentation? Well, I can tell you there are many reasons why you want to consider conducting demonstrations or continuing ones that you already do. You know, it's easy to blame some of the organizers when we don't have a good show. Maybe we feel like the traffic wasn't there or not enough people came to our booth in particular. But the fact of the matter is the organizers can only do so much. They do great advertising to drive traffic to the event. They pick cities that people want to go to. But honestly, the onus really is on us to help us help ourselves to have a successful event. We can't go by the old adage of build it and they will come. Sure, some people do that, but they probably don't have the results that they really were looking for. So there are things that we absolutely have to do as exhibitors to make sure that not just having a booth there, but that we're actually doing things in advance that will help drive not just traffic, but then successful interactions in our exhibits. And one of them is through demonstrations. So why do we need to do them? Well, you might be interested to know, and these are general visitors, not just specific to any industry, but visitors tell us that 7 out of 10 visitors plan their booth in advance, so that 70% of booth visitors to any exhibition plan their visit in advance. So what does that say to us? That says if we're not on somebody's must-see agenda in advance, we might miss the opportunity with them. And the fact that 45% of attendees only attend one exhibition a year if we don't happen to be on that must-see agenda, like I just mentioned, we may have just lost the only opportunity we had that year to get in front of them with something dynamic to show them. 9 out of 10 attendees say their number of reasons for attending an exhibition is they're looking for new products. So listen, this is our opportunity, right? We know they're coming to exhibitions to look at new products and services, and that is our opportunity to let our products shine. And again, one way of doing that is through a demonstration. So this is kind of interesting. These are stats that are actually from PittCon attendees, so this is very relevant to you. And again, further cements the reason why you really should consider doing demonstrations in your booth. More than 7 out of 10 visitors to PittCon are involved in purchase decisions, so you're talking to the decision makers. Half of them plan to make a purchase within the next 6 months. That is really soon. Many industries, there's an 18-month sales cycle, so that's exciting. And 45%, like the stat I just showed you before, 45% of PittCon attendees say it's their first time going there. So what a great opportunity to get in front of a first-time attendee and make a huge impression on them. And then 40% state that the expo is the main reason they're attending. That's huge. Think about it, because attendees come for many reasons. They're going to sessions, they're getting education, they're networking. But for 40% of them to say they specifically want to attend the expo, it's saying it's because they want to be there and see what you have to offer. And we know that 14,000 people are attending PittCon. So you've got all these customers, potential customers, all in one place, ready for you to have a dynamic demonstration. So again, why conduct demos? You know, demonstrations, what we hope they accomplish is creating an event in the mind of the visitor, right? Because the hope is that we create this event that is so memorable that visitors walk away and the only suitable solution in their mind after the event is your company and the products and services that they saw demonstrated at your exhibit. So I already mentioned this, but demonstrations, they create this lasting memorability, right? Because it's something that comes to life in the booth versus just having a conversation, right? Obviously, we still need to have conversations, but when we can do something that just creates more of a three-dimensional and something that maybe they can get involved in, it creates greater credibility and buy-in by the visitor. And really, skepticism is erased when we can see, touch, and feel something in advance, right? It's like anything. I think about online purchasing, and many of us, most of us, I'm sure, do some sort of online purchasing. But yet for me, there's still things that I prefer to go to a brick-and-mortar store to see and feel and touch in person. Clothing is one for me, shoes. I mean, I want to see how it looks on me, how it feels when I walk in a pair of shoes, right? So the same goes for our customers buying things. There's certain things they just want to be able to see, touch, see it demonstrated before they're willing to give their endorsement of purchasing the product. And that makes complete sense. 68% of sales and marketing managers say that there are actually fewer sales calls that need to happen as a result of a visitor having a demonstration in the booth. So in order to close a sale, 68% say less has to be done afterwards because it was seen demonstrated in a booth on the trade show floor setting. So I've given you a lot of reasons to think about why it's so important to conduct demonstrations, real stats to consider here. So why aren't more exhibitors doing that? It always amazes me that lots of people don't do demonstrations. Well, I mean, I hear a lot of different reasons, and all of them have validity to them. Sometimes there's a large expense, depending on the product or equipment you might have to ship. There can be an argument made that there's a lot of expense to ship it there, extra costs that have to be endured for additional setup time. You may have special staff that have to come because only certain staff know how to demonstrate this particular piece of equipment. And there may be some limitations by show management, depending on the hall we're in or the location of the city. There may be some limitations on what you can and can't do with equipment. And I recognize that some of you would have to get a larger exhibit space, which again is additional money, if you exhibit or demonstrate certain pieces of equipment. So there's lots of reasons why people don't feel like they need to do them, but there's lots of ways around that, and we're going to talk about those. Let's first talk about why demonstrations fall flat, because oftentimes I see great effort that goes into these wonderful demos, but many times they don't work out. and they're not as successful as we had hoped. And so we tend to blame other things, right? We tend to blame the traffic at the show or the expense of this or that, and maybe we just didn't put the right things in place and have the right strategic plan set up in order to make sure we had a successful demo. So to start with, we should be able to quickly identify a demo, the demo type, the subject, what's going on. And I say that because we typically have about 3 seconds to grab a visitor's attention when they're heading down the aisle. There's lots to see when you're in the exhibit hall, right? Lots of other booths there, people trying to get the visitor's attention. So unless, again, we're on their agenda, they're coming to see us, we need to make sure that what we're doing is well thought out, and so visitors know exactly what's going on very quickly to grab their attention. Sometimes it's all show and no boasting. All show and tell and boasting. So that means that we're just talking heads and not giving really the attendee the opportunity to ask questions and tell what their pain points are. So we don't want to just hit them with a feature dump. We want to make sure that we're having an interaction with attendees so we can understand what the benefit is to them and position everything back to benefit them or what they're trying to solve. So sometimes it's all hands on and no tell. I've seen lots of demonstrations also where got a great demo set up there, but maybe there's nobody there that's knowledgeable enough to speak of it. So we can have a demo, but if there's nobody there to help or assist or answer the right questions, that can fail too. Message is not audience specific. So what I mean by that is sometimes we decide to set up a demo and we decide we're going to have it at 3 events coming up. Well, each event is very different, and each event should have their own strategic plan set up for it because we may have different audiences. And one audience may not understand a certain message that has been set out there that might have applied for another event. Plus, you could also have different audiences at the same event. Think about that. There's different levels of management or people you may be selling to. Make sure if you're doing some kind of demonstration that you've considered all that and put messages for specific audiences so we're not leaving anybody out. And here's something to think about. Is the environment awkward or not comfortable? So in this case, we almost have to be an attendee at our own demonstration or event, right? So that we can see the forest through the trees, because oftentimes we don't realize things going on because we're so busy in the planning and execution that we don't realize there's some things that may be issues. There could be technical problems going on or speaker issues that we haven't addressed. But the attendees see it, and then we lose them, and they don't walk away with the messages that we had intended them to. Some other things that can cause demos to fall flat is too much information, too much detail. We do have to remember that we're in the exhibit setting. This is not the end-all for most cases. Most people are not writing orders on a show floor, typically. So what does that mean? That means there's probably going to be some kind of follow-up action to happen after the event. So we don't want to go into the level of detail we might go in if a representative went in and had a specific appointment. We want to give enough information where it lends credibility and great information to the visitor, leaves them convinced to want to know more or see more, but we don't want to overload them because, again, they have other things to do at this event, not just see us. We want to make sure we're always having an interaction. So what I say, when I say that, I mean your demonstrations could be as simple as one-on-one, 2 people talking, or you could have a theater-type presentation set up with a speaker. Either way, we want to make sure that there is visitor interaction because we run the risk of offending some people if we're not, again, gaining some feedback from them. And again, it could be on one-on-one setting. It could be one representative talking to a group of 5, making sure to include everybody in that conversation and discussion so they're addressing specific needs. And the same if there's a speaker up on a stage. Somehow it should be built in where visitors can interact and ask questions that is very relevant and specific to them. Otherwise, again, we lose them. Other reasons why demos tend to fail are, again, not setting objectives like I'm talking about now, actually putting a plan together, somebody in charge of putting a marketing plan together of the strategies and objectives and tactics on how we're going to pull off this successful demonstration. Oftentimes, we forget about the visitor. We're back in the back office planning in advance, and we come up with all this confusing jargon, marketing speak. I hear it all the time. I talk to visitors to trade show exhibits and often ask them about certain slogans or messages that we spend a lot of money on, maybe with agencies, to project in our booth. And when you ask an attendee, oftentimes what you hear, what does that mean to you, that statement? They say, oh, it's marketing speak, and it doesn't necessarily mean something to them. So we just have to make sure, again, we do a gut check on, is this specific audience going to understand this message? Is it meaningful to them, or is it something more important to the marketing team back at the office? Okay, other things that need to be considered with the demonstration is the location in the exhibit. This can be very important. I've seen demonstrations where they want to put them in, let's say, the back corner of the less busy aisle so that they weren't taking away from other marketing stations. And that may be fine, but how do we get the word out then to visitors where that's located? How do we ensure that they understand how to get there, that we're doing something in the booth? That may involve a lot of pre-promotion, right? So in advance of the event, during the event, and then also making sure our staff working in the event are telling each and every person about what's going on with the demonstration. If there's certain times the demonstration is taking place, making sure, again, the staff is informed of that so that they can let our visitors know. We might want to think about printed schedules, depending on, again, what kind of formality you're doing with a demonstration. If visitors can't stay right then and there, we want to encourage them to come back. So it may make sense to have a printed schedule to hand out, a printed piece in the booth, in several locations in the booth. But we definitely need to consider that because, again, they're going to see other presentations happening and talks, and we want to make sure we get them and they spend time with us at our demonstration. So I like to say when we're thinking about demonstrations, and again, no matter what type you're doing, there's human factors that need to be considered. And there's really 5 of them. And it's really all the senses that are involved: sight, sound, touch, smell, and taste. So what does that look like? First of all, again, be an attendee at your own event. If you can't do that, perhaps consider assigning somebody in your group to be looking out. Maybe you assign 5 people, 1 to each senses, so that, again, we're not getting so clouded over with execution that we miss the things that seem so obvious to the attendee and, again, end up creating an unsuccessful demo. The first is sight. Can you see the demo? And really think about this, because I've seen great plans put on paper and planned in advance of event for a demo. Then we go on site, and guess what? We didn't consider that there was a pole standing out in the aisle that now is blocking the screen that we had perfectly positioned to capture attention of the visitor walking by. That's just one example, right? Or we didn't think about, we hung the height of the monitor that the presenter is going to be referring to right behind him. So he's literally standing in front of the screen and visitors can't see it any longer. These sound like simple things, but you would be amazed how many are overlooked and then not considered in advance enough that changes can't be made. So it's important for us to take a critical look at everything we're doing as far as sight. And make sure the lighting works. You know, the lighting the day before the show opens is very different than the lighting of the show, you know, the morning the show opens, because there's a lot more light. Has it created a glare we didn't consider or didn't notice the day before? Are we in a darker corner and now there's not enough light? These are things, again, that really need to be taken a look at from the visitor's perspective so that we can hopefully troubleshoot on site if need be. And can the demonstrator see the audience? That's really important. Again, we want to make sure the demonstrator is making eye contact. I don't care if you're up on a stage or if you're standing in front of a demo. Eye contact is one of the most important things of having successful demonstration or really any conversation in booth. I was just with a group last week, and I was trying to explain to them that oftentimes I see presentations fail because there might be a group of, let's say, 4 people around one person presenting. The problem is the presenter began with 1 person. The other 3 kind of joined in later. What happened was they were never really welcomed into the presentation, and the presenter, not wanting to be rude to the first person that they started with, just kept continuing to make eye contact with that 1 person only and speaking basically to them. Well, you probably all can guess what happened. The group of 3 other people ended up leaving because if you don't make eye contact with them, they don't feel a part of the conversation. That's one of the most important things, if I can instill upon you, to make sure that your staff understands. And you know, it's difficult for salespeople to understand that because they're used to going out one-on-one and having appointments. They're not used to being in the middle of a presentation and then additional people joining in and then having to shift and include other people. It really is a skill that needs to be taught. And until we point that out to our staff, they don't even realize they're doing it. But it can have a really negative impact on people that are in the middle of the demonstration. So, and also, we want to make sure it's interactive as can be. You know, sometimes you're going to do a demonstration where you need to do most of the talking and presenting. But when you can, when possible, it's always great to build in some kind of interactivity, whether it's asking a question and using the stats from everybody in that, or asking a pain point and then speaking to that one pain point that the visitor just brought up. Or maybe they're doing the demonstration, maybe it's some kind of equipment that they can handle, or letting them push the buttons or test it themselves. Because again, as I said at the beginning, the greater we can make it interactive, the more credibility goes up with the product because the person sees firsthand how well it does or works. But it creates this memory in their mind that you cannot replace with just a conversation. It just takes it to that next level of memorability and understanding and credibility for the visitor. So interactive is key. Okay. Also, sound we need to consider. This is really important in the exhibit environment because, again, when the day before the show opens and we're testing our speakers, how they sound in the hall, or if you have a video playing, or the equipment that's going to, give off some kind of sound, it sounds very different than the morning the show opens. We haven't considered and couldn't possibly consider all the sounds that are going to happen on opening day because we don't know what other exhibitors are doing until the show opens, right? So we really have to be paying attention to that. Do adjustments need to be made to the sound? Does it need to be turned up, turned down? Is there feedback? All those need to be considered. Something else that needs to be considered is accent and language. I've seen a lot of presenters, for example, companies that are foreign-owned and bring people over from other countries to speak at a U.S. Congress. Well, sometimes they have a very thick, heavy accent, and people cannot understand exactly what they're saying. They may need a little practice up front, which I suggest for all speakers if you're having either people bringing in customers to speak on your behalf or people from the company. I suggest doing definitely practice sessions so they can feel comfortable with the content they have to say, and we can make sure that everybody understands their language or accent if they might have one. And again, also with the jargon, we don't want to get too technical, right, because we might go over some people's heads. Sometimes we have scientists or researchers from the company or the engineers do our demonstration because they know the most about the product, and that's great. That's fascinating. But sometimes they can get a little bit too technical. So hopefully somebody is overseeing this and dumbing down the presentation so that we got to remember to keep the customer in mind and what's going to make sense to them. We also have to think about volume. I was a part of a demonstration recently where it wasn't going to be on a formal stage, and so the client opted not to do any kind of microphone or headphones for visitors. Well, what happened was when the hall filled up, it was meant to be kind of more personal one-on-one demonstration. So go around to the equipment, and I've got 4 or 5 people with me, and I can easily talk to 4 or 5 people, and they can hear me. Well, it didn't turn out that way. It got very loud in the hall opening day. Some of the equipment was running, and that was loud. And the 4 or 5 people ended up being more like 10 people, which we hadn't planned for. The people standing behind, the second row, forget it. They were lost. They could not hear. So a microphone might be something important. Sometimes we don't want a microphone because you're afraid there's other demos also going on in the booth that might interrupt them. So here's something to think about, and I've seen this work very well. A microphone that he's speaking into, but it goes to headphones, and the visitor wearing headphones. Now, that makes it difficult for others to join in, but there might be certain demos where that's how you want it. It may be a personal demonstration set up for a certain period of time, and it might make sense to do that. The point is we just have to consider all options and what your actual goal is and objective, and make sure that we've done all the right things so that the visitors can hear, or we've created the right environment for everybody to be comfortable. We also have to make sure, there's lots of enthusiasm, right? Sometimes, again, we have some speakers that we haven't coached. And believe me, people need coaching. I speak all year long on many subjects, and I still practice for every talk I do because it makes sense, and you want to be able to appeal to your audience. But enthusiasm is one that you have to. And sometimes we get people that are very knowledgeable about the product or, the technical information they understand real well, but maybe they don't have the right enthusiasm to appeal to your audience. And you need to consider that, right? We don't want to put the wrong person up there and have people leave feeling less inclined about the product versus more inclined. Again, I'll mention this again and again because when possible, touch is so important, hands-on. We want assistance from staff. I can tell you I've seen a couple demos recently that have failed, and they failed because they set it up as being self-interactive. Well, that's great, but I have to tell you, in the exhibit setting, and you may have already seen it yourself, visitors are very hesitant to interact with something by themselves. Number one, they're not sure they're supposed to. Even though it may say touch here to begin, they're hesitant because they don't know the technology necessarily. They don't really know what this is and what it has to offer, what am I supposed to do with it. So they're hesitant to do it. We need to have staff there to assist, even if it's self-driven. Have a staff person there to help guide them through it and show them, here, step right up, let me show you what this does, and let me ask you what you would be interested in. I can help show you how to get there. They need encouragement and somebody there to ask maybe an additional question or two. So make sure you've thought about that, and instead of sending 5 iPads or large screens and, well, nobody used those, so we shouldn't do them again. Well, maybe it's just we didn't staff it properly for people to be interested or understand how to use them. So dynamic demonstrations, I like to say it accelerates the selling cycle. Heck, being at a trade show accelerates the selling cycle, right? That's why we're here. We're not, again, writing orders on the show floor, but it's one more step in the marketing communications process. We're hoping that being at a trade show will lead us one step closer to a close on buying a product or service from us. And the same with the dynamic demonstration. It really is understanding their needs and then providing them a solution through your products and services by doing a great dynamic demo. I like to say there's 3 keys to success for dynamic demos. We can remember 3 things, right? The audience, the message, and the big idea. So what does all that mean? First of all, got to consider the audience. I mentioned it before. What is it they want to talk about? Create some kind of prospect profile ahead of time so you know your audience. And again, it could be you could have 2 prospect profiles at one event and be able to appeal to both of those audiences, because we can create this great demo and think it's fantastic, but if we haven't considered the audience and really customized it to fit what their interest or their need is, then we're just going to have a failed demo and go back and end up blaming somebody for not doing something right and not feel like we should do demos again. So think about the audience when you're creating your audience message. Okay, how do we convey our message? We got to prioritize what we're going to say. Like I had said before, we're not there to go into a lengthy, full-on demonstration where it's probably the last time they're going to interact with us. This is just one more step in the process for us. So we've got to prioritize. We can't do everything at this event. Think about your demos that they should not be more than 10 minutes long. They really shouldn't. Anything longer than that, and we probably need to be setting up some kind of follow-up appointment. If you do have a demonstration that's more time than that, I would suggest maybe off-site, meaning another room in the hall or back in a suite, or it could be a room in your booth if you've got a large enough exhibit where you're actually setting up appointments. But if this is not by appointment, nobody is going to want to or be patient enough to stay more than 10 minutes because they haven't planned for it and they have other things to do at the event. Okay, we've got to simplify our message. I mentioned that, simplify it with jargon and number of pieces of information we're going over. Really let your demo prove your points. That's what it should do. A well-designed demo should be able to prove it to the visitor because it's live and in front of them. So use it to your advantage. And make sure you're thinking about, viewing it as though you're the attendee. If something doesn't look right to you or make sense to you, it probably isn't going to the visitor either. So we don't want to make something overly complicated or try to convey too many points or messages in one demo. We really want to keep it simple and think of creative ways to do that too, right? There's so, again, I hear the argument that, it's too big of equipment, it's too much money to send in. There are so many creative ways. I'm going to talk through some of them too if we move on to the presentation, but there are a number of creative things you can do that might address some of those concerns that I brought up at the beginning. Okay, and so the last thing, the big idea, right? I always like to say with any kind of demonstration or anything you're talking about or presenting about, so what's the big idea? You almost have to, I stop after each presentation, I say, okay, Holly, so what? What's the so what factor in yours? What's the takeaway, okay? So you think about, have I really made a point? Have I made a compelling argument that the visitor can walk away with? If you haven't, right, then you probably need to go back and rethink what other changes could I make to have a more positive takeaway. And speaking of that, a takeaway, you should think of something that we can leave a bottom line takeaway for every visitor to walk away with. When visitors go to events like this, they are on information overload, right? Because they're attending sessions. Some of them may be speaking at sessions. They might be presenting posters there. They're networking with colleagues. They're coming around to see you at the exhibits. They are on information overload. And so what do we all do when we have information overload? Well, we're human. We have to start dumping some of that information to make more room, right? So think about your so what and your key takeaway. What's the big idea that you can leave with every visitor? And it may be something you start with at the beginning of the demonstration, but make sure you end with that same big idea. One key takeaway that will be implanted in their mind so that we did what? Like I said at the beginning, so we created memorability in the mind of the visitor. And that all begins with the big idea or key takeaway. Okay, so just kind of to wrap all that up, just remember it's all about your audience, right? And they hear and they're interested. I think we've all heard these stats over time. People who hear something like you're hearing me now, you're likely to remember a small amount. If you hear something and you see something like you're seeing my PowerPoint now, well, memorability goes up much greater because you're hearing and seeing, so it's cemented in the mind more. But if you hear, see, and do, so I get you involved in something, so you're not just sitting there watching me present or listening to me talk, you are so much more likely to walk away and remember it. So again, think about how you can build in something that you can get them involved in and do so that their memorability goes up much better. So other things to consider. What's the most compelling, interesting, unusual, coolest thing about your demonstration that you're trying to prove? Think about how you can use that product and create a mini demo, maybe to create this bigger idea of a problem it solves. There could be some unique ways that you show something that isn't exactly the application of the product. I'll give you an example. Many years ago, I worked for a medical device company, and we had one of the slipperiest Foley catheters, which was very important in that industry. How are we going to demonstrate that? Well, we used a fish tank, and we would put the Foley catheter there to show how the silicone got really slippery, and it really created that experience in the mind of the visitor. They could visualize it from that point. So think about how you might do that with your products to create lasting memory in the booth. Consider a giveaway of some sort. Now, it may be a giveaway of that item, or it may be something else. Obviously, you may not be able to give away certain items, but if not, there could be something else, or a discount. And maybe you're running a contest in the booth for attending the demonstration. Maybe you do that once a day, or every day you do that. It might help drive people to come back to the booth again to say you have to be present to find out if you won, or come back to see it listed on the board if you won. Again, it has a dual purpose because it gets people interested to want to participate and to want to return also. And it could be a very low expense item that you might be giving away or discount. Again, I mentioned more in-depth demos. You might want to consider doing them off-site. in a suite at the event, or sometimes organizers have rooms you can rent on the show floor where you might be able to do a more in-depth demo. I've seen people where they show up for an appointment and they've had special staff that actually escort the person at their appointment time to the off-site location so that they can ensure they got there safely. I've also seen some, and of course it depends on the show and availability, where they had a separate tent, if you will, outside where they had the larger piece of equipment that they were doing demonstrations there. Again, because it wasn't feasible to have right in their booth at that time. There's lots of creative things you can think of. Or it might be right in the booth, as I said, in a private room. And you put some exclusivity to it by requiring people to sign up. And you can have them sign up in advance, plus have some slots available on site for last-minute people. But it does create this exclusive kind of environment then that people all want to be a part of. Make sure you're considering promoting this pre, at, and post-show. You know, it's so important, not just pre, that's very important, but continuing to do promotion at the event, I think is just as critical, reminding people. So, and now with social media, it makes it so easy and kind of inexcusable not to be promoting it. You know, but post-show is just as important. And lots of times I see that's where things stop. That, okay, we did pre and at, well, we don't need to do anything after. Capitalize on what you did at the event. Maybe there's some exciting stuff you can report back through social media or on your website, or the people who came by the booth, just a reminder card or email, or the rep coming by and talking about it. There's so much promotion that can be done, and again, the more promotion you do, the more it helps you in the end. So other things to consider. So there's some fun things you can do in an exhibit, depending on, you know, what the equipment is. I've worked with several healthcare clients that have big equipment, and they take to exhibitions. Now, sometimes they can't afford to take all of it and, you know, or fit it all in the booth. We understand that. But I have several that hosted a big unveiling and actually brought the equipment there just for this unveiling of this brand new product that was launching, and they timed it around the show. It was brilliant. Several people have copied the idea now, but, you know, they set up an event in advance by notifying the press, notifying their customers, having big signs in the booth that at a certain time and date in the booth they were going to do an unveiling, and executive management or the president was actually doing the unveiling and would be speaking about it, and, you know, had a big champagne toast over for everybody there. You wouldn't believe the fanfare that created for that exhibitor. They were packed with people, and all the attendees around them, or all the other exhibits around them, probably were not pleased because they had crowds and crowds of people. So it's a fun thing to do, and it creates excitement around a new product you might be launching just in time for the event. There's other things that you could create, a game or exercise where attendees are invited in to all participate together and maybe compete against one another. You know, that creates excitement again. And, you know, attendees, they're all competitive. They like to do fun things and win contests and participate. And maybe it's a great way to demonstrate how your product is used successfully. Have a printed schedule in the booth. I mentioned this already. If you're going to be doing something in the booth, make sure others can see about it and hear about it and be talking about it. Create some buzz. And the only way to do that is by making sure you're putting it out there and people are aware of what you're doing in the exhibit. I've seen some other creative ideas where, again, clients I worked with couldn't bring the equipment because of expense or timing or lots of things. I'd want to create a virtual lab where you actually stepped into this room created in the booth, but it was a virtual lab, and it took you to various locations around the world where the equipment was in place and running right then and there, and there was somebody at that demo site that was hosting live talks back and forth with the visitors. It was a great way for them to see the equipment being actually used with patients live and somebody demoing it. It was almost like you were there and in the room. Very creative. Also had another client I worked with where they couldn't set up the lab in their booth, but they got access to space at the hotel next door and set up a virtual lab there. And again, by appointment, had visitors going over and conducting demonstrations live so that they could, you know, use the equipment themselves. Another creative thing is mini models, and I'll show you this next one that just is a few examples of models I've seen over time used very well, where, again, these happen to be large turbines that really couldn't very easily be brought to a convention. So how do we do that? Sure, we can invite customers to come to, our home office and see them, but we're at this trade show where 14,000 people are at, and we want people to have an idea. These mini models were created and actually were working models. So the visitor could come up and push a button, and the turbine would actually turn on and simulate what the real turbine did. Now, does it take the place of seeing the actual real thing? Well, of course not. But in this case where it doesn't make sense and you're not able to bring that, this was a great solution. And to tell you what, it was a great attractor to the booth. People love models, especially things that move and have lights on them like these did. Draws people in and they want to be a part of it. This client actually had, and you can see it in the upper right-hand corner, they were doing some expert center presentations as well. And again, it was this new technology in a turbine that they created, and what they did was they came up with a virtual 3D video, and they were showing in there, and the video took you through the turbine, so you became part of going inside the turbine to see the inner workings. It was fascinating and really, really well done, and was a great way to demonstrate this new turbine that they obviously couldn't bring with them. So again, we got to get creative, Some things may be prohibited because of cost, but when we put our thinking caps on, there's always creative things we can do like this to still get our point across to visitors. Okay, have a demo strategic plan, okay? So I've mentioned this from the beginning. Don't just say we're going to do a demonstration and we'll see how it goes. Let's have a plan, and that means writing a script with the target audience in mind, like I've already talked about. Who's the audience? What's going to appeal to them? What are they going to want to hear? What are they interested in? Know what your goals are. What is your goal? Your goal might be, we want to set up, out of demonstrating this to 100 people at the exhibit, we want to walk away with 50 leads of follow-up visits in the field for a further demonstration, or whatever it is. But make sure they're specific, right? Specific goals that you can go back and say, did we meet our objectives? Because we all know trade shows are very hard to prove the value of. In fact, I'm sure we're all constantly getting feedback from management on what do we get out of that. And so many times it's so hard to pinpoint a lead taken at a show back to a sale made, because some of us have very long selling cycles. Some have shorter, but even if you have a shorter selling cycle, it's still hard to say that this trade show was the result of this sale, right? So how do we prove value of a trade show then? There's other ways. By creating strategic plans where you have very specific objectives that are measurable, that we can go back and say, you know what, check, 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 check. We met all those objectives that we set out in the beginning. And that's so important, especially if you have to answer to somebody after the fact, which I think we all have to. But make sure when we're doing this that we're stressing the benefits, not the features. We get in this, cycle, especially sales reps, and I love sales reps. I'm one myself. We like to talk, especially about all those great features of our products. Let me tell you about those great features. Got to remember the customer, okay? They're not buying it for the features. They're buying it for the benefits to them or the end user, just like us. When I'm picking how to spend my hard-earned money, I'm sitting back thinking, how is this going to save me time, money, make me prettier, whatever my goal is. I'm thinking about what is the benefit to Holly, and that is exactly what our customers are thinking. So when we're setting up any kind of demonstration, be sure the staff or who's ever doing this has that goal in mind and is positioning things for the benefit of the visitor or the end user. And make sure somebody's working on a social media plan. I'm sure somebody at the organization is already thinking about that for the show. But if you're doing some kind of dynamic demo in the booth, we want to capitalize on that, right? With live tweets and live, postings so that people know what's going on right then and there at that moment in time. And we do need to consider the staff that are needed, right? You might need special staff to come in, and that needs to be considered and planned for in advance. That all has to be part of our 5-step plan. Okay, writing our script. So thinking about what's your competitive advantages or just differentiators, and then put in terms of the benefit, right? We know what our great features are and our differentiators, but how do I put that in terms that is going to be a benefit to the people we are actually trying to reach out to? Make sure it's part of the message. And it's always good, no matter what kind of demonstration you're doing, include a couple of questions, because some people may have questions, but you might get a group that all of a sudden doesn't have any. But you want to bring up a couple of questions that are most commonly asked so you can address in advance. So if you've got a shy group that's afraid to mention something or bring something up, or if nobody brings something up, you can already address a question that they may walk away and think about later. So it's smart to kind of plant questions in advance that your demonstrator might be able to use. Make sure to keep to the time. There's nothing more frustrating than if you actually have a schedule and you say, the demo is from 2 to 2:15, and then people show up at 2:30 and the demo's still going on, and people are starting to leave because they've got commitments and made other plans. So we've got to make sure that we keep ourselves in check with who's ever giving the demo, that they are on time. And that's why I say practice in advance. If we give our presenters time to practice in advance, we can work out the bugs and say, okay, it's not long enough, or we're going over, we need to cut something out. We want to do that in advance so that we look like we're organized and we know what we're doing versus, oh, we didn't do any pre-planning and now we're upsetting visitors. Okay, so when you're setting up your goals, and I actually advise clients on this for anything they're doing in their booth with their strategic plan, they should have quantifiable objectives, okay? But specifically with the demo, as I mentioned before, set very specific objectives and then create criteria to meet them. So I gave you the example earlier. Our objective is we want to demonstrate this new product to 100 people at PittCon. Okay, so that's the very specific objective. But what's the criteria that goes around it? We want 100 demos, but what do we want to happen after that? We want 75 people or 50 people to sign up for an additional demonstration back in the field with their rep. Okay, so the whole idea is getting very specific so that we can count ourselves accountable and be able to look at it afterwards and say, was this successful or not? And we got to remember when we're creating our demos, think about other successful people who have used this in the past. Maybe you even have a customer presenting. There's nothing more powerful to a visitor than somebody else who has successfully used your product and has good things to say about it. So either a customer testimonial, and if that can't be in person, maybe it's via video, or you do have the customer speaking at a certain time, or you've created some kind of demonstration in advance that shows the customer's data or stats, and they've given you permission to do that. Because again, that is a very powerful thing for somebody to see something about your product that has been successfully used and endorsed by somebody they respect in the field. I think we've talked enough about this, and that is stressing the benefits and not the features. Think about how is this going to help the prospect? Why should they consider this, right? What has it done for others that might be of interest to them? And what other options do they have? Because we may have it set up one way, and we got to think about the visitor that they may come back and say, well, can I do this to it? Or can I alter it that way because I have a different need? Thinking about these things in advance will help us be more successful on the show floor because it looks like we've put some planning in place for this. Okay, and the promotional plan. Obviously, pre-show promotion, on-site and after. You're probably going to need help with somebody in marketing if that's doesn't fall under your area. But again, whoever's in charge of that, make sure they understand everything you're doing with this so they can help best advise you on what promotional plan you might put in place. Okay. So this is really important. 85% of your show's success is the staff in the booth. And this goes for any trade show you do. 85% is on the staff. They are so important to the process. So we've got to make sure we're picking the right staff and know what to look for to do our demo. First of all, the reps we're picking, do they understand the audience? Have we let them know who the audience is and what's important to them? Do they understand the role we're asking them to do and the goals, the outcome? Do they really understand how to work this demonstration properly and what the benefits are of it? These are all important questions to make sure you review when you're selecting staff that would work this event. Obviously, we want people that are highly, knowledgeable about the product and that feel really good about it, but that are comfortable with maybe preset agendas or scripts and that show enthusiasm for the product. Again, it's a fine balance. We want someone really product knowledgeable, but we want someone that appeals to the audience and knows how to speak, because sometimes we don't get both of that. Or sometimes we get somebody who's a good speaker, but they don't have the right information and can't answer the proper questions. So you need to consider this when you're selecting your staff. We have to make sure staff, they know how to maintain eye contact with everybody in the audience, right? That they're not just looking at the screen or looking at one person. So they're probably going to need some coaching. They need to be very aware of other people joining and how to bring them into the fold. We got to instruct them on nonverbals, because nonverbals can often be offensive to visitors who don't know them. We need to make sure that they're thanking the audience, smiling, maybe having a floater to help welcome new people as they come in, or helping them find a seat if it's in a theater setting. That way the speaker can focus on what they do best, and that's speaking on the subject and not be having to worry about the other incidentals going on with visitors out there. And make sure to allow time for questions if there's a formal presentation, because we want people to feel that their questions are answered. And oftentimes they bring up a question somebody else had anyway. I definitely suggest a training session for presenters, even if it's, you know, a small presentation. Make sure they come in the day before the event or an hour earlier, 2 hours earlier, so they can role play with staff and other people can see how they're doing and offer some feedback. That's going to be really important to make sure that they go off without a hitch on opening day. Now, here's another option. If you don't have room in your own exhibit or aren't able to get space elsewhere, PittCon has done this for you. They have a space available on the show floor. This is in your prospectus. You can find it there. I just took it out of there. But for a small fee, you can schedule a demo, and you've got 15 minutes to run it. I'm sure PittCon after this can give you more information, but there's an alternative for you if you don't have room or want to take up any space in your booth. They've built it right on the show floor, and I think that's fantastic. I wish more organizers offered that option, because it really helps exhibitors out who can't do it in their own exhibit booth. This is just more additional information of what PittCon will provide. Again, they can give you more of that information afterwards if you're interested, or it's in your prospectus for you to take a look at. But for that $175, this is a great deal that they're giving you. So to kind of wrap things up, I think everybody can have dynamic demos if you plan very completely, you execute aggressively, and follow up thoroughly. I hope I've given you some really good things to think about as far as why it's important to do demos, first of all. I think I've made that case. But why demos fail, so that you can do things differently. And I hope I've given you ideas that if you can't bring the big equipment and do these big demos in your booth, some other alternatives I've given you to think about that you might consider, because we know having interactive, dynamic demos in your booth makes all the difference with having a successful event versus just having a mediocre event. And we want you to have a successful event. I know PittCon does. So I hope I helped you today, and that wraps up my formal presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions that anyone might have.
Thanks, Holly. Hi, everyone. This is Marion from PittCon's marketing department. Before we go to questions, I just wanted to comment on one of the points that Holly made about promoting your demo. If you're planning to do something special in your booth or hosting a demo this year at PittCon, please let us know ahead of time, and we will be happy to promote that on our end. You can send an email to marketing@pittcon.org, or just feel free to give us a call. So I'm going to turn it over to Kim now for questions.
Okay, Holly, we have a couple questions here. So if anyone has any additional ones, just make sure you type them into that questions box on your GoToWebinar toolbar. So, Holly, do you have a best practice recommendation on how many demos you should run in a day?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, I think it could be answered a couple ways. I would be looking at a few things. I would be looking at the schedule of the event, because certainly we don't want to time it around any really important speakers that are happening, you know, keynote speakers that we know everybody's going to go to. So we don't want to compete with that. So I think the first thing I would be doing is looking at the schedule and seeing, you know, are there unopposed hours? Where are the keynote speakers speaking? Are there lunch and learn programs going on? Because again, it might end up shortening the amount of demos, I would suggest, because of other things going on. So think about that. And then I would say, you know, the ones that I see that do it every half hour, I think that seems like overkill. People end up running into each other when you don't have enough time in between to offer. Usually the ones I've seen that are successful have been somewhere, and again, this all depends on what's going on at that particular event, but the ones I've seen successful end up being somewhere between 2 and 4 a day, if that gives you somewhat of a hint. And again, it just kind of depends on you and what's happening that day.
Great. And then another, if it really is out of a company's budget to bring equipment, what do you consider to be the best replacement?
Yeah, so if you can't bring equipment, is there a video you could create, a 3D video of some sort, or even a video that highlights the equipment, shows the equipment in use, that you could set up a small theater in the booth to show people, or even a video standing on a corner if you don't have room like that in the booth? Could you create a smaller demo like the one I showed you of the turbine? You know, that might be out of budget too, I understand that, but smaller mini demos I think are very effective. Videos, 3D videos that show the equipment in use I think are also really effective. Those would be probably the top things I would suggest in lieu of being able to bring the equipment.
Great. And then I had another question here that was for PittCon. Will the PittCon marketing team help for a fee, or is it part of what we're already spending? If you're doing a demo like that in the booth, we wouldn't ask for a fee like that. Just make sure you let us know ahead of time, and we'll probably put it on our social media channels and things such as that for no fee. Another question was, how do I print or save the PDFs? There should be a handout section on the GoToWebinar platform. If you just click on that, I guess it would sort of depend on how your computer works, if it would go directly into your downloads or if it should pop up. But somehow it should pop up. And we'll have some of these also available on our website as well if you can't get them downloaded directly from the GoToWebinar platform. And I have another question for you, Holly. What type of exhibit booth is best fit for a product line that meets various applications? Do you highlight to fit one audience over another, or emphasize your product versatility?
Okay, so read the question one more time to make sure I understand it correctly.
Sure. I can ask it in parts. What type of exhibit booth is best fit for a product line that meets various applications?
Okay, so I guess you're trying to determine, should you bring all the different applications, or I did hear the end part say, or you should focus on one. Is that what the second part was, Kim?
Do you highlight to fit one audience over another, or emphasize your product versatility? She said yes, so
yeah.
You are understanding correctly.
So a couple of things. Let's say it's a very specific event, like a very specific audience that you know is really only interested in this one area. I guess I would spend my money on really beefing up that area and bringing that product, but at the same time, you can still highlight breadth of line and other things that you cover by not bringing the product. And what I mean by that is you might have virtual brochures or videos or things that show the other line but aren't taking up the space. So if it's a very specific event that you know is just this one audience, because actually I've seen that a couple of times with some clients I've worked with, where somebody came in and it was a very specific audience and they only had this one product line, but somebody actually, for whatever reason, wanted to see what else the company had. And fortunately, they had done just that. They had a timeline, actually, of when they got into different areas of different product lines, which was really effective because it showed that they weren't just in one avenue, that they covered many different areas. So it was impressive. But then they also had these electronic brochures that people could access any of the products the company had and then request more information. So in a case like that, I think that seems to work best than trying to bring the whole kit and caboodle.
Great. And I think that was our last question. And also, we are out of time as well. So thank you again, everybody, for attending today. And thank you so much, Holly, for your great presentation. For our attendees, if you wouldn't mind to please complete the very brief survey that will appear at the conclusion of the webinar. And a recording of this will also be available on our website in the Exhibitor section very soon. So please feel free to share this with your colleagues and tune into our next webinar in this series, which will be around September. So thank you and have a great rest of your day.